Please say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're coming in from. It's always fun for us to see where everybody is.
I'm in Los Angeles.
I'm in Gainesville, Florida.
I'm in Carlsbad, California.
Great.
All right, I think we're live everywhere. So
okay, we are live. So I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for being here for our special show today. This, of course, is Live with Marcy and Amy, the Heart-Centered Woman. And today our theme is The Heart That Grieves is a Healthy Heart. Find support, compassion, empathy, sisterhood, and healing for yourself and others. So with that, hey, Ames, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm trying to ground into the subject matter today because it does require that grounding. And this is our fourth year, right?
Fourth or fifth. Yeah, we do it every year. Yeah,
which is an important subject. And something that Marcy and I are aligned with. In our life is aligned in very magical ways throughout the years of different happenings happening at the same time, even we didn't know each other. And so speaking on grief and allowing space for grief is one of our big missions and what's really important to us. After both of us going through the process of grief on many levels, many times, that we finding that discovering how important it is to having a healthy, happy life is really imperative for us to speak on it and to bring it to you and share our insights.
That's right. And Amy, as long as you have the floor, do you want to just tell people a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Oh, sure. I'm Amy Shade. I am the creator of the Radical Embodiment Method. It is a method that supports women in their lives and really transforming from being not following through on their dreams, being stuck in their life, from feeling lonely, from feeling as if there's something more for their life. And I support them in connecting their mind and their body, bringing the embodiment aspect into the transformation so that they can really come into themselves, really let go of many things that are holding us back, as we know, whether it's past wounds, whether it's mindset. And so we really support women in taking back the reins of their life and feeling really grounded in who they are, which, of course, I'm very passionate about. And so, Marcy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Marcy Newman. I'm known as the Heart Shift Coach. And I also am very honored to be here today talking about this subject. As Amy said, it's one that's near and dear to our hearts. We have a variety of experiences in this and have, just worked with people in navigating and healing grief in the years that we've been together. I am known as the Heart Shift Coach, which is a process accumulating through the 50 plus years that I've been working to help people to heal their hearts. And my work basically is to focus on self-love, what that means, and what it takes to create a self-love lifestyle. Heart shifting is the process that allows self-love to become the predominant energy, and of course, to create lives where it's a reflection of your heart's desires, your happiness, and of course, creating your health. So with that, and to begin officially our show today, I would like to share a quote with everyone from Elizabeth Gilbert. And this is on grief. And she says, deep grief sometimes is almost like a specific location, a coordinate on a map of time. And when you are standing in the forest of sorrow, you cannot imagine that you could ever find your way to a better place. But if someone can assure you that they themselves have stood in that same place and now have moved on, sometimes this will bring hope. And this really encapsulates every reason that Amy and I are here today. It's to bring you hope and also to provide some guidance and tools for working through this energy that in a lot of ways is so overwhelming to people. So, Amy, I'd like to begin by asking you about your perspective of grief and what does grief ask of us?
Thank you for that. I also, first I want to add a couple things. One is we're going to have Peggy also come on the show, talk to and share her experience with you, because Peggy O'Toole, because we invited her on for her story and her navigating grief, which is I think would be very beneficial for everyone to hear. And second, I want you, before we start, I want you to really honor where you're at in this time. Many of us are in different stages of grief. And it's always good to honor where you are. And when we're speaking about certain things, you don't happen to be there at that time, don't have any feelings about I should be farther than I am, or I'm not experiencing this, what's wrong with me. That to really respect where you are in this process is part of the process. Okay. Part of the process of grief is to be okay and feel compassion for yourself wherever you are at. Okay. I just wanted to kind of put that out there. And so, what does grief ask of us? Oh my gosh. Grief really asks us to question, let go, embrace, open up. There's so many things that grief asks of us, which is why people have a difficult time navigating it. Oftentimes, I was asked this question on this interview I was on last week, and she said, did this experience crack you open? I said, no, it decimated me. It took me out. That's what the experience did. It didn't crack me open. It took me out. And then I was able to rebuild through compassion for self, through the grieving process itself, which is a lot of crying, a lot of energy release, a lot of permission for me to feel what I was feeling. So grief asks us to really go through a process that really lets go, demands that we let go of what we believe to be true. Okay. So this idea that, this particular thing will bring safety, nothing will happen to me. Good things, bad things don't happen to good people. Oftentimes we feel safe, really safe, and this certainty. If I have this thing, I'm going to be very certain. If I have, like for me, when my fiance passed away, I was with my fiance. My future was secured. Okay. That was my thought. My future is secure. I had that in my mindset. And when it obviously wasn't secure, it took me out. So I had to re-examine that thought and be like, "Ooh, you really can't depend on certainty. So therefore, what do I depend on? What do I ground into? What is this? What is it? What can I really feel safe with?" Right. And so we're going to talk more about this. I'm going to stop my thing, but grief really asks us so many things. But ultimately, I think it really asks us to enter into life with more love, more compassion, and more understanding. I think ultimately that's what grief asks us to do once we go through the process. RC,
Mm-hmm.
let's yeah, so what is grief and why is it both misunderstood and yet deeply feared?
So, I want to address
Yeah.
grief from a couple of different perspectives. Number one, the way we typically understand grief is that it is a process of us acknowledging and healing after loss, right? And so this can be the loss of a loved one, it can be the loss of a job, it can be a loss of a relationship, it can be a loss of a dream, an idea, which is what Amy was referring to, right? And so the grieving that takes place is after a loss. And again, most people have the thought that grieving is just for the loss of a loved one, but it isn't. And that's something really important for us to talk about. Grieving is simply that process, okay, of acknowledging loss. But grieving sometimes doesn't wait until after the loss itself. Very often, the grieving process is one that begins even before the loss is enfolding you. And it happens again, very much like Amy was describing, where the grief is this realization that all the dreams that you had are soon going to come to a crashing end. The security that you had is soon going to dwindle. But I want everyone to really understand that this can happen anytime that you see something coming, whether it is like the loss of a job or the loss of a loved one. When you are going through that process, it is a process of accepting loss. And when it, of course, is the acceptance of loss of a loved one, it is absolutely devastating. So when we start to understand that grief and loss are connected, but not necessarily after the loss itself, it tells us that grief also has a different component. And so when I look at grief and I look at it energetically, what I'm understanding is that grief is actually a catalyst, almost like a metabolic catalyst. It is active before it reaches even that point where you recognize it. And I think that this is where a lot of people get so confused about it and misunderstand it, because they are waiting for the shock after the loss when in fact they have been living in grief without even realizing it. And so, what I want to really emphasize is how grief is a natural part of our living. It's part of our life. And yes, we experience these incredible times where there is a tremendous loss and we suffer. But grief is actually happening even before we're aware of it. And so the question really is, if it's part of our normal life, our natural living, why are we so afraid of it? And I think my response to that would be because we equate it with that huge, like crescendo of suffering. But grieving is a healing process. It's one which we are letting go of what was, and we are preparing ourselves for what is, and then what is to be. And so this concept of grief, and we'll be talking all about the deeper aspects of grief and how we all experience it, is calling to us to have a greater understanding of it so that we actually allow ourselves to grieve more. What I have found, and I'm certain, Amy, you can attest to this, is that when working with my clients, they have been through so much grief and have no real realization of that. And so there's a fight, a rejection of it, when in fact it has been part of their healing process and of becoming who they are. So this is so important that we understand that grieving is healing and that it is nothing to fear. And is it possible for us to start to acknowledge and accept fear as part of our natural and normal life? Yes, it is. And that's what we're going to talk more about today. So, Amy, with that, I know you've had some deep suffering with grieving experiences that you've had. What has been your experience with grief and how has it changed you?
Yes, thank you for that. There's so much I want to piggyback on.
Go ahead.
But I'm gonna start here, then I'll wrap
Okay.
it around because yeah. So you know, we are living this life, and I was in this life with my fiance, and the only grief I had experienced was like with my grandparents when they passed away when I was 13, and then my cats, and maybe my aunt, right? And my aunt. But it was very far away from me. And it was often, like part of life, right? Because you're 80, you're older. It's kind of like this part of life thing, right? Even as a kid. And it was far away. It was far away. So I didn't see it. I didn't experience. I just heard of it. And so my relationship with grief in that manner, as far as loss, losing someone I love, was there, but it was also very far away. My experience with the loss of my fiance was we're going forward, and all of a sudden he goes to the doctor and he doesn't feel well. He goes to the doctor and he finds out he has cancer. And then within that 6 weeks, he passed away. And then within that 6 weeks, I was the main caregiver because he stayed at home and he passed away at home. So I was through that process, bringing with him through that death. It was very impersonal. I was involved in every aspect of it, and I wasn't equipped for it at all. I was not equipped for it at all because I had this kind of I'm going to say privileged or like fantasy or some kind of life I was living that, everything's going to be perfect. Everything's going to be great. Right. And so when he passed away, that really hit me hard. It hit me hard on the level of love, losing a loved one, and it also hit me hard on my idea of being safe in this world. It really jolted uh my uh safety, my faith in that, the world is going to be a positive experience for me, right? And so it really shook me to the core, and I had to really go in and re-examine my beliefs and my thoughts, and also uh, be hook up to the higher power of Mother God, universe, however you want to say it. That was very helpful. And really getting into this idea that I must be comfortable with uncertainty. I must let go of these perceived ideas about life. I must release this idea that love is conditioned on a live person being in front of me. I must hook into the higher power of love and how that will support me in my life. I must have faith that I am capable of going through this experience and improving myself. I must really ground into and recreate a new life, because my life was going one way and it was gone in 6 weeks. So I must create a new life. And so all of these changes happened through that one loss, right? And through that one loss, I learned how important the grieving process is, and that none of us are immune to loss. And through that loss, I became me. I became more compassionate, more loving, more open. I became more my self-love. I had to invest in myself and really love myself. So all of these beautiful transformations came from this one loss. And so this is it's changed me in all those manners that I said. And even now, as Marcy was talking about relationships, how the grief is not the end crescendo. Like even with my aging parents, I don't know if you guys have aging parents, that I'm grieving the process of losing the parent I had, and they're still here, right? So it's really allowed me to grieve when things are going and changing instead of trying to control and fight and keep. I've learned that grieving, you must grieve, let go, and allow. And then when that happens, there's more peace, and there's more when I'm looking at my parent in front of me who is now changed, I am accepting of where they are right now. And so learning how to grieve, and that major grieving process really taught me how to be more compassionate and more grounded into what is real and where I'm at in this moment versus where I used to be or where they used to be. So I hope that was helpful, and that maybe there was some kind of relatability or a new thought or a desire that came up for you. Hopefully that was helpful to you. So Marcy, can you share some of your own grief experiences and with us, and how you've healed?
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, we grieve on so many levels for so many aspects of life without any recognition of them. And so, if I were to look at my life and the experiences with grief that I know that I had, there are actually probably more than what I could count. I know that I grieved, as a child, for instance, every time that I felt, I don't know, like misunderstood. I remember crying and crying and crying. That's grieving. It's grieving for a part of you that perhaps has to give up that dream of being seen or heard or understood. It requires that we accept what is. I remember grieving, when my first boyfriend broke up with me. And oh my God, I thought it was the end of the world, and just grieving so hard, crying and crying and, going through the stages that are often described as part of grieving. But I also had this awareness that the grieving, as I said before, actually started before the breakup. I could feel the relationship coming apart. I grieved when I asked my husband for a divorce. But the truth of the matter is that I had been grieving for years before that moment that I finally had the courage to ask for the divorce. And I grieved through all of the different stages at different times. And then when I had moved to Arizona and my son was going to school, going to college there, and he was killed in a motorcycle accident. And I had just had dinner with him 2 hours before. And I had just met his new girlfriend 2 hours before. And I had just heard, for hours as we sat in his favorite restaurant, all about how he was on top of the world and how everything that he wanted was coming to life. And so before that, I had to grieve the home that I left in order to move to Arizona. And at the time, I didn't know why I was moving there. But it was clear to me that there was this intelligence that was orchestrating this very important part of my journey. And so my journey of loss became one where I became so aware of my spiritual journey that I was being called to step into. I didn't have an opportunity to prepare in any way for losing him. And I remember the shock of that. And actually this, level of denial, disbelief, and anger, and all of these things actually coming up together. I couldn't believe that, I had been directed to move all of my belongings, all of my life, everything that I had created back in New York, and just move it to Arizona. And then my son was gone. And so I remember going through those stages of grief with actually one foot in two different worlds. The world that I was very much a part of and had been working in and living in and still had hopes and dreams. And then a foot in this other world that seemed to have come to an abrupt end. And yet, that foot in the world that I thought had come to an abrupt end actually began a journey through that world that has brought me to where I am today. So what do we have the ability to glean from grief? We are grieving a loss, but we are also stepping into a brand new world. And that world is one that we often take our eyes, off of, and we forget that whatever we're experiencing in that moment that feels like an end is also a beginning. There is something that we are meant to experience that is going to change our lives forever. Like Amy was describing how the loss of her fiance changed her life. The loss of my son changed my life forever, but only because I was able to look at where that other foot was, even while I was in the grief of the loss of him. And it's not to mean that we are ever to, dismiss or try to bypass the grief. But what I think we're here to talk about today is how grief can actually be that catalyst to us discovering more of life. So on one hand, we experience it because of loss. And on the other hand, we are also experiencing what more life can be. And this is something that I think, really messes with us sometimes. I know for myself that as I had these moments of like revelation as to what was happening, very often the ego would jump in with, trying to bring in guilt and shame and all of that. And yet I had this need, deep need to understand what was really happening on a higher level. And so, this notion that we can experience loss and experience expansion simultaneously is one that, unless we give ourselves permission to experience, we will close down. And I believe that when we close ourselves down to that, we actually close down our grief and its purpose for us. So with that, Amy, I'd like to ask you, how can grief actually deepen our capacity for love, connection, and compassion?
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's a couple things. When my fiance passed away, it was about 3.5 years through the process. 3.5 years. The first 2 years were just very difficult for me, emotionally, physically. I couldn't create as a creator. I'm a dancer choreographer. It was hard for me to create. It was hard for me to leave the house. It was hard for me to be with friends. It was hard for me to tell people that my fiance passed away. I had a lot of guilt and shame around that. And I'm just kind of sharing with you because I did it very messy. Okay. That's what I'm trying to say is that it wasn't something that, uh, because I just don't want people to get the impression that it's easy. It's not easy all the time, or it's not, my perspective on it now makes it easier. But back then it took me out. It totally took me out. And so I just want to preface that just to say that, you know, um, you are where you're supposed to be. We're all here together, and that wherever you're at in this process is where you're at, and to really respect that. I'm going to keep saying that. But yeah, so, many people want to push away the grief. They want to stop it. They want to not feel the emotions that are coming up for them. And this is for many reasons that, we weren't taught to have a healthy relationships with our emotions as women. And so, we are oftentimes afraid of our own emotions and what people might think of them, or we are physically afraid of losing control. And as we pour out our emotions. And so there's a lot of things that we're afraid of in the grief process. We're afraid of how long it's taking. Why is it taking so long? I should be done with this by now. I'm tired of thinking of this, right? And so, or we, we judge ourselves around that. So the thing about grief is that it's, I want you to maybe think of it as a learning experience, as something that's there's so, like Marcy said, there's so much growth in the process of grief. There's so much, you have one foot going forward and one foot in this position of grief. And that there's so much more to learn about yourself and about others, which brings the empathy and the compassion for others. And I think a lot of people have anger issues and judgment around other people because they have not created a healthy relationship with grief, and they blame others for their losses, for loss. They blame others for loss. And so I do believe that creating a healthy relationship with grief really empowers you and really sets you in the energy of love and compassion, and gets you out of judgment and pointing fingers towards others. I do believe that the people who shut it off like this create that energy, that create that standoff energy. It's not going to enter it. I'm not going to do that. Whether it's anger, whether it's frustration, whether it's denial of like letting things in. I do believe you physically become the energy that you embody, that you give out. So those people that are like, boom, harsh, I believe it could be a reflection of their unhealed grief and their ability to process it in a way that opens up their heart. And I can say that because I was that person. I could say that because I was that person. No, boop, coming from that atheist household where, linear, it's either right or wrong, yes or no. It's either this way or that way, and that's it. I was exactly like that. And so I know that through this process of loss and grief, how open and more loving I have become, and how compassionate I have become for other human beings, and to allow space for people to really be open enough to allow the space for vulnerability, allow the space for love. Not the perfect space, people, not the perfect space, but a space. And so my experience with grief has really transformed me into a whole different person. And I'm grateful for every day that I have on this planet. That's the other thing that happens. You become very grateful for this moment because you understand that this is a gift. This is a gift that we're here because I could walk out that door and it could be done. I could, that's always a possibility. So I think grief really gets you into gratitude for life. It gets you grateful for life, grateful to be here. And so, and if you're not feeling that right now and you're in a position of decimation, which I have been in, where I was decimated, that's okay too. Don't rush it. Don't rush it. But just know that, like Marcy said, there are new beginnings for you. There are new beginnings for all of us. With each day that you open your eyes is an opportunity for a new beginning. That's what grief teaches you. And loss. Okay, so Marcy. So what would you suggest? Okay, so we're going to get into some tools. So what would you suggest for people who are grieving? Should they grieve alone or join groups in order to help them heal?
So that's actually a very difficult question because each of us is different and each of us is experiencing grief differently. What I do want people to understand is that you've been taught that grief comes in stages, and it doesn't. Grief is a journey. All right. You can experience, Amy talked about the emotional, aspect of it. You can experience all those stages in one day. You can experience the anger, the denial, the pain, the suffering, all of that in one day. So what I really want to emphasize is that as we start to accept grief and grieving as a natural and normal aspect of living, we can recognize our own patterns. So I know, for instance, again, going back to my divorce, I knew like a couple of years before I finally asked for that divorce that my marriage was deteriorating and there was nothing that I could do as as one person to change it. That grief, of course, was different in the grief that I experienced with the loss of my son. However, the patterning was familiar to me when I lost my son. I recognized that the grief was calling to me, and I, above all things, was not to dismiss it. I did so much healing through the process of like recognizing, the deterioration of my marriage and the final divorce, and then who I became after that. And in the same way, when I lost my son, as I said, it happened very suddenly. Just 2 hours before, I was laughing and having so much fun with him. And so you might say, well, how could I possibly have been equipped to handle that loss? But the truth is that other experiences in my life, because I allowed myself to be present in them, had somewhat primed me to recognize my own patterns and my own needs when I lost my son so that I wasn't lost in the grief. I allowed myself to journey through that grief. And by the way, it's now been 14 years, and there are still waves of grief that come through. I'm sure it happens with Amy as well. There are still waves of grief that come through, but when they come through, I allow myself to be totally in them, totally in them. And so when it comes to you journeying through your grief, the only way that you will know what it is that you need is to allow yourself to experience it. So you might search out a group and you might find that that helps you to heal. Or you may search out, certain friends that don't judge you and where you are with your grief, just allow you to be with it. Or you may find that you do your greatest healing with your own journaling or meditation or being out in nature. In other words, because grief is a journey where we are actually finding ourselves and the truth of who we are in the process, you must allow yourself the grace of not following anyone else's patterning for grief. So don't allow someone to tell you that you should be feeling this at that stage, and you shouldn't allow yourself to do that or this. I mean, I remember, at my son's memorial service, and somebody made a joke. I was laughing out loud. It was funny. It was a funny joke. And I know I probably shocked a lot of people around me to hear me laughing out loud. Like, how was that possible? But the truth of the matter is that I was in the moment. And when we are in the moment, we can respond accordingly. What happens with grief so often is that we get caught up by putting all of our focus on what we thought it should be, how that relationship or that experience was supposed to be. And so what happens is all of our energy goes in that direction, and we cannot be present when that happens. We are literally like hemorrhaging energy in this fantasy, this dream of what we thought should be. When in fact, if we can start this journey of acceptance, we can find within ourselves even stronger connections to what was. Because when we are looking backwards, we are adhering such expectations that we had on that relationship or how things should be, that we lose sight of what it was that we actually did experience. And so in truth, we rob ourselves of all of that love, all of the wonderful parts of it. And in actuality, it's like the reason why we are grieving. So it's a strange world. Let's just face it. This world of grief, there is no rhyme, there's no reason, there's no way that you should do it. And all I can do is encourage you to allow yourself to experience who you are in it. And when you do that, you will glean all of that love, all of that grandness of what it is that you have lost, but you will have it right there as part of your present existence. And it's the only way that you'll ever actually really experience what you had. And that is to bring it into the present, not send yourself into the past. So this is where we really start to recognize that it's a spiritual journey. for those who are attempting to get through grief, on this very, black and white, cut and dry methodology of doing grief, we don't do grief. Grief does us. Grief does us. And what it primes us for is actually living. And living from a grander version of all of life in ways that we can't even imagine, cannot even imagine. But we don't do grief. Grief does us. So allow yourself to experience it. Allow yourself. If, somebody tells you about a group and you have a thought that maybe you want to try it, but you find yourself, talking yourself out of it, try to talk yourself into it. Just to give it a go, just to see if it's something that speaks to your heart. The most important thing that you can do is to be present in your grief so that it can take you where it wants and needs you to grow. To grow. So, Amy, how about you? Do you have any gentle and practical ways to help people for themselves to get through the grief that's in their lives?
Yes, I would, what I did was I really focused on reducing my stress in practical life, meaning like I made sure my keys were put in the same place every time, so I didn't like get anxiety looking for my keys. I made sure that I prepared the night before, so in case I was going through a grief moment in the morning, that I could focus on that and not packing my day, what I had to do for the day. So I kind of set myself up and I got more organized in ways that if I needed to grieve in that moment, that I wasn't pressed for time about getting other things ready or doing other things. And because once you have triggers of anxiety and stress, it really just spirals you into a whole state that most of us have to go to jobs, and we have some people have kids. There's still practical things you have to do in life. So to really focus on how you can reduce those types of stresses that come up for you. I also joined the YMCA and went there only for the sauna and the jacuzzi. And people would be like, "You don't work out there?" I'm like, "No." So you can do it your own way. I just got the YMCA so I could just go sit in the sauna and be by myself and not talk to anyone. Or I'd sit in the water and get in the jacuzzi and let that happen. But people used to tease me because I wouldn't work out. But I was like, you get to do it your own way. I don't need to work out. I need to go relax, be alone in a space that's I feel safe, and to take care. So there's small things you can do to really reduce your stress. I think that's kind of an important aspect of grief, so that you can so that the grief is more of a natural process instead of one that's brought on by anxiety and fear. Those things are already there in the first place. So just kind of how to reduce it is helpful also. So I think this is also an opportunity. This is the beauty of it, right? Is you get to create your systems. This is what Marcy said, like you learn more about yourself and you invest in your own learning at such a high level, because what you're trying to do on many levels is survive in that moment for that day. Okay. And this is where some of us have been or are right now. So it's really important that you create your own systems. And it is part of your self-love, part of coming home to self, part of figuring out what you want. because something happened that you had no control over. And so it's a huge mindset shift of understanding, number one, you really have no control over anything, by the way. Like, that's just an illusion. But to really come to that understanding is it really pushes our buttons around safety and around our part in who we are in this world and what's owed to us, right? It really, really takes us to tasks on these types of ideas and beliefs. So I would suggest reducing any kind of outside stress that you can, meaning, you know, packing the night before, making sure your keys are in a place, doing some self-care, which doesn't involve anyone else but yourself, and your ability to let go, and not have any worries. So those were kind of the things that I did that really helped me through that time. So we're at 11 o'clock, Marcy.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's time for us to introduce our special guest, Peggy O'Toole, who has been part of our VIP program for actually quite some time and has added so much to our discussions and our understanding of life. She's an author and will be sharing her experience of grief with us. And then after that, we'd love to hear from everybody in the audience. Yeah. So with that, Peggy.
Introduce yourself and
Yep,
let us know
unmute
something
yourself and
about
come
you.
and say hi.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Peggy O'Toole, and as Marcy said, I've been part of this program as a guest. I'm just a participant for a long time, and Marcy and Amy have been very kind in allowing me to put in my 2 cents here and there. But this grief program is always a very important one every year, because one of the things that we have to realize is that grief is just a part of life. Nobody can escape it. And it can start when we're children very easily. We can lose a loved one then, or we can be like Marcy said, and like I felt as I was growing up, that nobody was paying any attention to me, and I was growing up alone, and you grieve your childhood. And another thing that I think is so important is that we have to realize that we have to grieve in our own way at each point of grief, and that it may be different and it may not look at all like we expect it to. It is just it is what it is, and it hits us as it does, and we can't beat ourselves up because we aren't classically grieving at times when people would expect us to, because perhaps we've already done most of our grieving before the actual event happens. That certainly happened with my mom, who I had taken care of for many years as she was in dementia. And then during the pandemic, I was separated from her, where I couldn't even talk to her. And at the time of her death, it was just almost like an afterthought. And I had already grieved, but I think what I felt was um, um, grief that I had been unable to be with her at the end. And that was really a hard thing to deal with. But her actual leaving of this earth was something I had already dealt with, I think, before that point in time. But grief happens all throughout life. I mean, I certainly also grieved when I lost a job and I was the sole breadwinner, and I was so fearful that I wasn't going to be able to take care of my family. And sometimes people surprisingly reach out and say something to you at a time like that, and it changes you. It helps you deal with your grief, because my husband at the time told me, maybe this is for the best. You perhaps something better will come along. And indeed it did. So the same thing happens with relationships. You end a relationship, and sometimes that opens you up for a much better relationship going forward. And when I divorced my first husband, also, I mean, I had been grieving for years for the loss of that relationship. But when it actually happened, like Amy said, I was devastated. Even though I divorced him, I was devastated. It took me 2 years to really get back to feeling like myself again. And that it's surprising. How can you grieve a relationship that you knew was over many years before? And it's because it wasn't the relationship, it was the loss of that dream, the
Right.
dream of having that forever, happily forever after marriage. And also dealing with him telling me things like I was, in my 30s, and there were lots of women that were younger and more beautiful than me, and I would never have another relationship. And you have to find a place to where you can find yourself and realize that maybe people aren't telling you the truth, and you have to find your own way through that grief. And I finally did. Of course, I was a single parent, also dealing with a completely new paradigm of taking care of a young child and working and trying to find my way through that. Uh, of course, my deepest, most recent grief was the loss of my third husband, who really, after a hard life where I wasn't happy through much of it, I had finally found a home. And even though I had known that he was ill, I knew he had been losing weight. I knew that he was starting to fade mentally. Um, when the actual event happened, it was sudden at home. I had to perform CPR, and so I had that horrible experience of feeling ribs break under my hands as I was trying to bring him back to life, and then watching the paramedics try and bring him back. Um, you, then you're dealing not just with grief, but you're also dealing with trauma at the same time. And it, it, I, I have, this is now almost, it was at the end of 2022. It's been some years since that time. What I found helped me through that time was first of all, having people around me that helped me through it. I mean, I was able to reach out that night when my husband's body was laying on the floor after the paramedics had left, and call my daughter and son-in-law and ask them just to come over and do vigil with me because I couldn't be alone. And then the next morning, my my son had driven all the way down from Northern California to be there with me, and he was there with me. He left his job, he came down, and he was with me for several days. And then my sister came and was there for a week, even though she had to leave. She was also a caregiver. She had to find somebody to take care of her wife and come down and be with me for a week. And then my best friend came, who cooked all the meals for her husband, and somehow she had to make sure he was okay for a week and came down. So friends really, really helped me at the beginning. But I also felt I couldn't deal with this by myself. Um, so I reached out the very next day to Kaiser, and I said, I need to speak to a grief counselor. And because I know I'm not, this is such a blow to me that I can't deal with it alone. So I did that, and I also joined a grief group as well, when it became available, which was almost 6 months later. So you have to find those things that help you through it. For me, when Ron passed away, I made a decision that I was going to keep my life as close to as I could to how it had been, because for me that was important. That stability a life that I had lived with, even though I was without him. And it really helped me a great deal. But you can't beat yourself up for how you feel or how you're dealing with it, and it changes as life goes on. Like Marcy said, some days you're going to find yourself suddenly crying. It's just going to happen to you. Years later, you'll see a picture or something will happen. I know one of the things that I really regretted when Ron passed was he had a beautiful voice, and I had nothing that had his voice on it. And then years later, here I was watching a video in which I was belly dancing, and in the background I hear his voice, "Shake those hips, baby." And it was just such a delight. So we all deal with grief in our own way, and you basically have to accept how you're feeling and reach out when you need to reach out, and find those parts of yourself that are resilient, that can and find those things in life that you treasured, that they don't go away, they're still there. All of those things you treasured about those relationships, or even before, um, uh, even though they're not there exactly the way they were, they're still there in memory. And a, I personally have the belief that the our energy, our life energy, doesn't go away. So when I still see my husband every time I see a rainbow. So when I see a rainbow, I see Ron. I have crystals in my window every morning. I can get up and I can say, "Hi, Ron," as the rainbows go around my room. So it's grief is an interesting animal, and every one of us is going to deal with it in one way or another throughout our lives. And I think it's important to reach out also when you need help.
I actually appreciate so much what you just said, Peggy, because I also agree. Grief is no time to be a martyr. You have got to reach out for whatever it is that you need. It is the most important time to learn that. And the other thing that I wanted to add is that very often, well, I'm going to use myself as an example. When my son died, I had this realization every time that I went to like one of my other children with my grief, they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle it. And I realized it's because they are grieving their own journey, right? They are in their own grief journey. And so it's all the more important that we learn to reach out, whether it's to other friends or it's to a mentor, a guide, a therapist, a counselor, to a grief group, whatever it is that you need, you must reach for it. Yep. And don't judge anyone around you for how they are grieving. And what that does is it will allow you to not judge yourself and to just be in your own grief journey without putting any kind of shoulds or constraints on that. So important. Peggy, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your experiences. You also brought up a really important factor, and that is that very often, our loss includes trauma. In which case, trauma is a whole other aspect of it that must be dealt with. And that really does require professional help. Yeah. The same thing with Amy. Amy had a lot of trauma with Frank's death. I had trauma we have to reach out. We have to deal with those things. So don't think that you are weak or unequipped to the point where, there's something wrong with you. Nothing really prepares us for what we are going to experience when we are grieving. But there is a lot that we can do for ourselves. And the most important thing is to be able to stay present in it. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Peggy.
So, do we want to hear from others that would like to ask questions or, let's see, you can put something in the chat if you would like, or raise your hand. We're happy to take your questions, or if you'd like to share something.
Gonna stop the recording or what do you do?
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Let's stop the recording. Yeah, so that we can, just have a very private and sacred space.
Yeah. Hold on, hold on.